So you've written a novel, but is it any good? How can you tell if you've written a literary masterwork or literally a masterclass in mediocrity? We throw around these terms like good writing and bad writing, good novels and bad novels. But what does that actually mean? How can you assess whether a novel is good or bad? This is a tricky thing to do, so today we're going to look at some of the common ways to determine the quality of a novel. As you'll see, most of these methods fall apart under a little bit of scrutiny, which makes deciding which one to use quite challenging. Speaking of decisions that fall apart under very little scrutiny, if you think seeing more videos from me is a good decision, then consider subscribing to my channel. Alright, the first way to assess the quality of a novel: how many copies it has sold. 99% of the fiction that people read is commercial fiction, which means that to acquire the book, they are exchanging cheddar for it. So if you have a better book, it means that more people are buying it because more people want to read it. More people wanting to read something implies some degree of quality. Now, there are some issues with this, which we'll discuss, but of all the methods to determine how good a novel is, this one is probably the most objective and definitely the most entrenched. I mean, writing a bestseller implies that it has sold the best. One of the highest accolades you can bestow upon a book is it being a bestseller is entirely based on sales. Also, since money is a limited resource for so many people, the fact that people are spending money on a specific book is, to one degree or another, a strong signal of preference. You can give out unlimited 5-star reviews and you can heap praise onto any number of novels, but if you only have a certain amount of money to spend on books, then that's a true preference signal. That's a signal that these books are good enough that people are willing to spend limited resources on them. Now, using sales to assess the overall quality of a novel presents a whole bunch of problems. First off, how well something sells depends in large part on how well it's marketed. People don't buy the best books, they buy the books that they've heard of. This is why the top spot on Amazon's homepage or being on the octagon when you walk into a Barnes & Noble is so important. A great book with mediocre marketing will be outsold by a mediocre book with great marketing almost all of the time. Obscurity will always tank the sales of a book, regardless of how good it is. Now, there are occasional times where a book is so good that it manages to overcome this obscurity by word of mouth and ends up selling a whole bunch of copies, but that still means that the book is overcoming obscurity. It still means that it's marketed well. It still means that enough people have heard of it in order to buy it in large quantities. It's also worth pointing out that the whole book selling game is not for everyone. There are probably people writing bestseller quality work out there who just have no interest in publishing or engaging in that world. Everyone assumes that if you write a novel, you want to be published, but not everyone is into that. The next way to assess a novel: reader reviews. This is basically any process where someone reads the book and leaves some kind of rating, either a qualitative review or some kind of star rating. This one is closely linked to the sales one because if people buy a book, those are the same people who will potentially be leaving a rating for a book. I mean, you could just give a novel to 1,000 people and get their opinion on it. That would separate the sales thing from the review thing, but that's really impractical to do and presents its own sets of problems. Reviews are plagued by the issues of preference. Different readers like to read different novels and theoretically will rate a novel to one degree or another based on their preferences. Give 1,000 romance readers a fantasy novel and they'll probably rate it poorly because it's outside of what they like to read. Even within a genre, there are some readers who will like a specific novel and some that won't. Novels are a lot like food. The preferences of the person eating it matter way more than the skill of the chef that prepared it. Yes, the quality of the preparation is a factor, but if somebody isn't into steak tartare and you give them the best steak tartare in the world, they might like it better than the worst steak tartare in the world, but they're still probably not going to give it 5 stars because they just don't like steak tartare. I think I like saying steak tartare, though. Sample size also matters here. This book got 5 stars. This book got 4.5. This book has 12 ratings. This one has 45,000 ratings. So the question becomes, if you give a book to 10 people and they all think it's 5 stars, does that mean it's a 5-star book? If you give it to 20,000 people and they think it's a 3-star book, does that mean it's a 3-star book? Reviews are ultimately just opinions, highly subjective opinions that can be biased by all sorts of things. But what if we evaluate a novel based on its technical merits? You can go off and find all sorts of writing rules and structures and ways that you should go about writing a novel. There are endless articles and blogs and videos and books that go on about what goes into a good character or an interesting plot or a gripping setting. So what if we assess the quality of a novel by how well it checks all of those boxes? This becomes problematic very quickly. First off, building that list of boxes that one needs to check is going to be a laborious task that's going to be affected by the opinions of those people building it. Second, a lot of what makes a great novel is very ephemeral. It's difficult to measure or even assess if what makes a truly great novel actually appears in a novel. A reader that emotionally connects with a character does so because of so many unconscious reasons. It's not just a checklist that you have to work through, it's a confluence of emotional engagement and emotional resonance that is a bit more nebulous to pull off. You can do all the right things, but you can still not have a character that a reader connects with. So a novel that checks all the technical boxes may still be a dud to read. Also, many of the great novels out there violate many of these rules and also succeed in spite of that. A great novel is more than just the sum of its parts. You can't just knock off a list of technical criteria and have something great. Sure, those things are useful, and if a novel isn't working, then that list would be a good place to check. But as far as a surefire way to determine the quality of a novel, I don't think evaluating it on its technical merits checks all the boxes. And the final way to assess a novel that we'll be talking about today, and boy, it's taken us a while to get to this one, longevity. If people are still reading and talking about a novel decades or even centuries after it was written, then that's a sign that it's got something going for it. Anything meaningful, anything that has any sort of impact is going to have some degree of staying power. The longevity of a novel, how long it manages to remain at least partially in the public consciousness, is arguably a measure of its quality. And it's not always the case that this success comes within the lifetime of its creator. Herman Melville really didn't see much success during his lifetime. It was only several decades after his death and 100 years after he was born that interest in his work really took off. Now, this idea presents an obvious problem. Yeah, if people are still talking about a novel 100 years later, then we can assess it as a good quality novel because it's obviously had a certain impact, but waiting a century to see if your novel is good is not practical. I can't think of any worse obsession than being obsessed with what people will think of your work 100 years from now. You're like guaranteed to never be happy because you're probably not ever actually going to experience that impact. There might be an idea for a novel there where a guy is like so obsessed with writing a novel that people will still be talking about in 100 years. So he has this time machine and he keeps going ahead in the future 100 years to see if people are affected by the novel that he wrote 100 years ago. And then one time he goes forward, he finds that there's this dystopian government that has taken over the entire world based on the novel that he wrote, and he loses access to the time machine, and then he has to like fight against this dystopian government to get back to the past, and it's the government that was described in his novel. That might be a good idea, but it would be very hard to assess whether it is or not. Anyway, I would love to hear your thoughts about this in the comments down below. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.